So NASA's had their testing and actual missions, like the Western States fire missions, using the Altair and the Icona platforms. Is this integration process and the testing able to build off of that experience at all?
So we're not flying Altair anymore.
Okay.
We're flying our Icona, which is really a Predator B. It's really an early version of it, and we're flying Global Hawks.
Yeah.
Some of the original Global Hawks that the DoD had that they since they didn't need them anymore, they gave them to NASA. With those missions that we're flying, as important and significant as they are really part of that by exception segregation. Mm-hmm. So when we fly the Western States Fire Mission, we do it under a COA, so we do it by exception, and we don't integrate with other airplanes. Mm-hmm. So that kind of work is strictly for doing the science side of it. And while we gain some experience, and we certainly can leverage that experience, it's not directly related to the challenges associated with integration. It is data that we are interested in terms of how aircraft operate when they're flying, what the pilots are doing and how they're interoperating with the system, how the air traffic control system is interoperating, but we're not looking at the specific challenges of integration. So that by itself, and you know, it comes to also to the question when people say, well, the DoD is flying these aircraft overseas, so how could that be hard to integrate them? Well, it's a completely different set of constraints. Yeah. They're operating in a very different environment in the theater, and we're operating in a very different environment when we're doing it under a COA. To actually integrate side by side with manned aircraft puts the level of safety concern at a much higher level than if you're operating in theater or operating on a COA. So while there's information to be gleaned from that, it's not sufficient to answer the challenges of integration.
There's some universities that have already developed UAS programs. Will they be able to, especially if people are interested in Earth's science research like NASA's already been doing, will they be able to collaborate with the future testing, like with the selection of test sites?
Yeah. So there's a couple components to that question. First off, there's many universities that are engaged in UAS right now. Most universities, I would say. Yeah. We've dealt with probably 30 or 40 different universities that have some interest or have some capability with UAS. Right now, we're pretty engaged with BYU, which is a university that by NSF has been put in charge of UAS work. And so we're teaming with them as well. But there is North Dakota, New Mexico State. We've dealt with Stanford. We've dealt with University of Michigan. There's a whole plethora of universities out there that are working on UAS stuff. So there's an opportunity there for universities, as these test sites get stood up, to be able to collaborate. Most of the test sites are probably going to be sort of geographically located. So if one is stood up in North Dakota, then certainly universities that are nearby are probably going to have an opportunity to participate in those. How those test sites get laid out, what the criteria are, and then how they're utilized is still a work in progress. So the FAA has to put out the rules for engagement in terms of those, and then there has to be a selection process, and I believe the legislation says that by December they have to have selected these 6 test ranges. How then the test ranges can do, I mean, they have to have a pretty good business model to be able to operate, because there's no federal funding to go with that. So how they set that up is going to depend on how interactive they are with government agencies and probably with universities. But there's an awful lot going on beyond the test ranges that universities should be thinking about being involved in. We've got a lot of different NRAs that we've put out, NASA research announcements that are specifically for dealing with academia, small business innovative research agreements that are out that are dealing with small business. So there's a lot of opportunities to engage with NASA in terms of both flying missions and in terms of airspace integration.
The motivation and the funds are going to have to come from within as a community-based approach then.
So for the test ranges, that's true.
Yeah.
For things like NRAs, and we sponsor those. The FAA is standing up a Center of Excellence for UAS that'll probably involve a number of different universities. The BYU Center for UAS, which I mentioned under NSF, the National Science Foundation, they're teaming with right now with University of Colorado and a couple of companies, 10 companies. So there are lots of opportunities if your university is interested in getting engaged. There are avenues to do that, both with federal funding and as part of a consortium that might include some private funding.